Jim, while we're on the topic of bankruptcy, a lot of folks here may not be involved in bankruptcy work, may be more restricted to, serving as a receiver or participating in receivership cases. Why would a receiver care about bankruptcy? Why might it be an important thing to consider when you have these kinds of fractionalized interests or interests in entities?
Yeah, representing receivers, we're often early on knocking heads with the third parties who are, the managing members of these organizations. And so we need to know what our rules and tools are, both in receivership and bankruptcy in order to bargain away. We have to be able to sit down across the table and say, look, here's what we want to do. We want to put these assets up for sale. You've been arguing I can't sell them unless I sell them back to you, or you've been arguing about this formula buyout and everything else. If you're going to keep with that position, I'm going to let you know that you're going to see this in a bankruptcy case, and we'll get it done there. So I need to know those rules in order to get to often what is a consensual sale and a consensual process. And also something I've seen done rarely, and it's only in real larger cases, and maybe some of you who are receivers have seen this done in your own cases. I call it kind of the ultimate tactical nuclear weapon is you as a receiver can go to the receivership court and get permission to file a bankruptcy with you as the receiver in control of the whole process, as receiver being the debtor in possession. You need good, clear orders to get it done, but then you can take advantage of a lot of the things that the code provides. And one of them we alluded to and we passed right over it was, let's say you have a tenant in common interest, and you're a minority. You're not in control of the overall association that runs everything, but there's real value in the property if you can sell it as a whole. Real difficult to get done in a receivership, but you could, in a bankruptcy case, use provision 363H, potentially, but it's hard, but you can get it done to sell the whole free and clear of your co-owner's interests, plural. You've got to give in that case, the co-owner does get a right to match the bids, but it's a process where you can take it to market and sell everything. You can't do that generally in a receivership case. But again, knowing the rules and tools of bankruptcy gives you some bargaining power and some leverage.
Yeah, particularly if you're an equity receiver, you certainly could get authority from the appointing court to get authority to file a bankruptcy petition.
Right.
So, Jim, anything more you'd like to add on bankruptcy before we move on to some examples of
I don't think so. I think that's enough. Just that we've hit on, the power to get around ipso facto clauses. We can use 363 in an executory contract situation to do some really clean sales, and sometimes buyers are insisting on that cleansing mechanism. And 363 is how we sell property in a bankruptcy case. So, yeah.
Now, Jim, you were involved in a fairly large case that involved a number of different kinds of interests, both interests in LLCs, membership interests, as well as fractional interest in real property. Do you want to talk a little bit about that example?
The Desai case? So again, we did prepare some materials, and you ought to look at the motion for approval of a sale procedure and the order approving the sale procedure. We did that up front. And then after Braun ran its process, we went back in and did a motion to actually approve the sales following this really interesting auction process. And in this case, we call it our dirty doctor case. There was a very, very prominent physician in Las Vegas, Nevada, who ran endoscopy and colonoscopy clinics. And he was very wealthy, and he invested in lots of limited partnerships in the real estate heyday. So he had tons of these little fractionalized interests. That was not his main, financial wealth was not that, but it was good part of his estate when he did file. Poor guy. He got a little greedy, ran his clinics a little bit fast, a little bit dirty, and ended up being accused of infecting a large number of patients with hepatitis C and other really bad diseases because he didn't clean the equipment fast enough, okay? And 40,000 people in the Las Vegas area were noticed to come in and get tested. And of course, while that's getting the media attention, the clinics are shut down like immediately. And so he went from being prominent physician to being criminally prosecuted. He ended up getting convicted of murder and reckless endangerment, spent time in jail, and ended up dying in prison. So in the meantime, Todd came in. And we were liquidating the estate. And so we had all these fractionalized interests to be sold. And yeah, we started contacting the general partners, the managing members, and we started having these fights and discussions about, can we sell this stuff? And it really wasn't the bulk of the estate, and our trustee was very skeptical of value, and indeed, he thought we would be lucky to get out of these minority interests maybe $20,000. So just keep that in mind. When we sent out an RFP to several different firms to come up with a process and help us sell them. And so, Todd, it's your time. You responded to the RFP, and you came back to us with a program for sale of these interests that was very different than what we're used to, maybe receivers are used to, of where, we're going to do an auction, a call auction in court or elsewhere, where, maybe we'll have an initial bidder, maybe we won't. We put the asset for sale, and people make their bids, and a gavel's dropped, and you walk out. We didn't do that.
So as a further introduction, Todd, so once you've worked through all of these legal issues and now you got something to sell, Todd, tell us a little bit about what you've done. Talk about the Desai case in particular, if you'd like.
Well,
how can you
my middle name is not Mortician, so I just want to start with that. Prefacing Desai, I think talking about minority interests, however we all would define them, and how they're held. There's numerous ways of holding, as Joel's rightly described. Our process, which we call MIMEX, Minority Interest Market Exchange, and it is specifically to value and sell minority interests held in commercial real estate, and in some cases very closely held businesses. But in this case, we're speaking about real estate. And there's a lot of question that I get right out of the gate. How do you value a minority interest? Any of you that are here that may have crossed paths in the world of gifting estate trust purposes, the IRS has a very defined, very specific methodology of valuation for what we call 706, 709 gifting purposes, of which we do this all by the hundreds a year. A question we get all the time is, well, are the IRS discounts relevant to what the market would be willing to pay for a minority interest? And they are night and day. There's no correlation whatsoever. Minority interests held are really held in what? In some sort of entity that has real estate as the main asset. So the value, starting with the value is the real estate. People are going to look at this potential investment, the purchase, right? And we'll speak about the Desai case. We may be selling a 32% interest, but a 32% interest in what? In a shopping center in Toledo, Ohio, in an apartment building in Encino, California. That's the value, that's the asset, and the analysis starts from that. And with that, we kind of either top-down or bottom-up approach in providing that information to the buyers so they understand what it is that they could buy. So that question of valuation is truly, what is the market willing to bear? No correlation to IRS valuation metrics, which of course is the kind of the metric in discount valuations. Process we came up with the Desai, and the Desai sale was very much tailored to the situation that Jim and the trustee came with us, to us for. And considering many of these interests were very small, in some cases 2, 3, 4%, we had very difficult times getting the materials, meaning the due diligence information. Very difficult. What was the property? Where was the property? Was it generating any income? I mean, it was basically, Jim said, Todd, here's what we got, go figure it out. And we had to try to figure out, from our perspective of marketing these interests, what's the best process to market them, and then who's our buyer pool going to be? First, the question was, how are we going to market the interests? As Jim alluded, this is, of course, in his case, a bankruptcy sale. We were structuring an auction. But in the Desai case, and the materials are in the online materials that Tony put together, you can access. You may have them here in front of you. We put together a what we call a sealed bid auction, but it was tiered. So we had a round one, what we call qualifying round bid process, and round two, highest and best. The purpose of driving this process of bidding was first to understand who we're going to get to buy these interests and what interest there was. And that would help us and Jim and the trustee figure out the strategy in round two, and maybe we only end up with a buyer for one of the interests. And I think, and Jim, I don't know, correct me if I'm wrong, were there 30 plus, 40 plus interests that we were selling?
More like 40.
40 plus interests. So, and then I think there's 1 or 2 properties that we were selling the fee simple in of as well. So we analyzed the process being bankruptcy. Yes, we wanted to use a tiered auction platform. So then there would not be, and I have to refresh my memory, I don't believe we had overbidding, did we? Or were we finalized? Our sale was final.
It was fine. We had phase one, if you will.
Qualifying round.
Qualifying round. And then you and the receiver sat down and identified the top third bidders.
Correct.
In each of the tranches. So only the top third of the bidders were invited to participate in the final
Highest
round.
and best.
And again, this was all sealed. There's no one sitting in a courtroom knowing what the other people are bidding. And you convinced us that was a good thing against a skeptical trustee, okay?
Yes, we had a lot of pushback, and the reason why I wanted to do a sealed bid sale, I'm sure most of you are familiar with different types of bidding platforms, or I would call it auction platforms, live, open outcry, sealed bid, online. I mean, there's so many different bidding platforms. The reason we chose sealed bid, and it's in many cases of specialty real estate that we sell the fee simple interest in, we use sealed bid because we either believe, A, there's not going to be a big buyer pool in the property, or in this case, the interests. So there's going to be a very small buyer pool. So in an auction, what do you need to create an auction setting?
2 or more.
A frenzy. 2 or more. Well, that's very true. There's some auctioneers, me included, that could say, well, all you need is 1. And in this room, no, you need 2 or more. So we believed that that for many of these interests, there may be only 1 or 2 bidders. And a sealed bid approach was the best way to effectuate and maximize the value. Why? Because all the other bidders, they didn't know who they were competing against, and they, of course, didn't know what the bids were. And it is very common in our standard sales that we do in Braun and in Premier Estates that we are going to have a very small pool of buyers. They're very high dollar properties, 10, 20, 30, $40 million. And there may be 1 or 2 or maybe even 3 buyers. So we have to structure that bidding platform so we are not leaving money on the table for the estate. In the case of Desai, we used the qualifying round, sealed highest and best round, for those very specific reasons. I want to go back to the information. Information in the case of Desai was very, very limited, as I said. But to maximize value, if one of you had a case, the first thing I would say is either hire a forensic accounting firm, speak with the managing member, the GP, whoever the party is that controls the flow of information on the property, the diligence materials. Those are all going to have an unbelievable important effect in how much we're going to extract for that interest. Because without that information, any buyer is essentially blind. And all they would have then is just the basic property, understanding the property, what it is, and then making some judgment call as to what kind of income they're going to receive over the life of the partnership interest that they're buying, and such as that. So, obtaining information is key. A common question I get is, who are the buyers for these interests? Who are they? Where do they come from? Well, quite frankly, in this real estate market that we're in right now, it is unbelievably diverse. You want to buy a property in the California market, you might pay cap rates that are as low in the very low twos. So people are looking for yield, and that yield is a perfect way to get in buying a minority interest in some form. So that minority interest is a great investment opportunity. In the case of Desai, we had very limited information. We finally, through I think it was a very long process, Jim was very helpful helping us get to the members.
Yeah, we actually had to use 2004 exams of a number of the managing members to extract information. Our debtor was under criminal indictment. His defense was, I am mentally incompetent to defend myself, so to stay consistent, you should have seen the depositions we had of him. They were useless. So yeah, we extracted the information, fed it to you, you put it in the data room, and I think the most valuable thing we obtained for you was the lists of members in some of these larger entities. So then you had your natural market, as you described.
So that natural marketplace was, of course, that existing buyer pool, and we have found in other situations unrelated to this that those buyer pool, those members are the first people that want to know that they have an opportunity to buy. Makes sense, right? They're participating already, assuming they're happy with the returns and the investment. They want to be buyers. Many times the GP doesn't give us that information or is trying to buy that interest themselves and, of course, take advantage of an opportunity. We try not and don't allow that to happen. But in the case of Desai, we marketed this, the auction of these interests through, and there's information in your materials about it, but we marketed this through many of these typical real estate places that one would assume if you happen to want to sell a commercial property. We used certain wealth databases that we have and own. We used the Wall Street Journal, which was, if I recall, reasonably helpful. And then, of course, with social media and the internet today, quite frankly, we're as much a marketing company as we are anything else in the world of real estate. So finding buyers is a process. Marketing the auction that we did for Desai was a process-driven, date-driven. It was very structured. In the end, we had numerous buyers for many of the interests, and because of the structure that I put in place, which was the qualifying round, highest and best would be the top 33% of the bids received in qualifying. Those people felt honored or lucky to get into that second round. And once they got into the second round, the guidance we gave them was, give us your highest and best. There was no guidance other than that. They did their own due diligence. And I have to say, we were all pleasantly surprised in many of the interests. If I remember, one of the buyers, I think, increased his bid by at least $100,000. It might have been 40 or 50% to get that interest. And in some cases, an interest may, not in this case of Desai we're speaking about, but it could take somebody from a very minority position to a majority position, hence even more value.
Yeah. So, I mean, in aggregate, the real difference in the aggregate was we went from the skeptical trustee value of about $20,000 to around $1 million.
$1 million.
Of proceeds. So it It was
Yeah.
material, you know.
Yeah. It was very material. Yes, Kevin?
On selling minority ownership interest, if it's sold to a party outside the partnership and there's debt on the property, how do you typically deal with that? Just because I know some lenders have clauses about.
Well, Kevin, do you mean, are you talking about where the minority interest in question is actually a minority interest in the property itself, or an interest in an LLC or other entity that has underlying real property?
Distinct
interest?
difference between them.
Because in the latter, you don't
Yeah.
care.
Right.
Yeah.
Under
but-
an
but
LLC,
I
you don't
think you're-
care.
But not if it's an LLC membership interest you're transferring. You don't care what the mortgage, I mean, you may care from an economic point of view and the value of
Yes.
what you're paying. But from the lender's perspective, you know.
They don't care.
Not if you're selling a minority interest.
And then how about with individual ownership types of partnerships?
So you're speaking, let's just assume a TIC interest. So you own it directly, you own, let's say, a 1/3 interest in a property. That debt that would exist is, of course, yours, and if you're hypothetically the seller, that's going to be transferred to the new buyer. All of that information, of course, has to be disclosed, and that transfer has to be allowed by the documents, the loan documents that would be set in place. So they may or may not be assignable, and that lender may require essentially, or would trigger a new loan. That's possible. We have not seen that happen yet, though we're taking to market a third interest right now. Yes, go ahead.
I'm from Arizona, and I had that same exact situation. And the judge prevented us from doing it, and I went back and did the research, and I didn't realize, but in Arizona, there's a statute that allows for it. So notwithstanding the due on sale clause in loan documents, it didn't stop us. So I showed it to the judge, and in Arizona, because I don't know about California or Nevada, and they probably have similar statutes, and I was able to sell it subject to, it wasn't a tax.
It's subject to, not an assignment and release of the debt, right?
No, we didn't release the debt, so we said that we're selling this interest in the real estate. And then the lender didn't have an issue with it, but the judge did. And he said, well, no, it's due on sale clause, and even though the lender hasn't shown it to your sale, we can't do this. And in Arizona, there's a statute that actually allows for it. I'm sure there's one, if Arizona has it, and they usually mimic their, or they take their statutes from California.
It's possible, I'm just not aware of it. Al?
Joel, just one caveat on your comment about not caring too much if what is being sold is a minority interest, you know it's coming.
Yeah, I know where it's
A
coming.
minority interest in real property in an LLC where the property is encumbered, is you still have to look at and disclose what's in the loan docs, because often even if it's a permitted transfer under X%, there's a fee chargeable. And
That's true.
Oh, yeah.
That's true.
I mean, there
Yeah,
could
and
be
it-
lots of.
Right, and
loan
obviously, if the
documents.
interest violates the change of ownership provisions,
Right.
which is exactly where you're going. Yeah, absolutely.
Well, that might go back.